So,
Yeah,
folks, it's a few minutes after 8. It's probably good to get the meeting going at some point here. Um, I do have to let you know that Steve is not able to be on the meeting tonight, so he won't be able to do his update of the information about the museum or have a tour of one of the areas in the museum. But we are very, very fortunate to have James O'Neill making a presentation to us tonight. It's almost like that other stuff would have been in the way of us getting to the meat of the meeting here. So we'll kick off with James's presentation, and then afterwards we can have the usual book club if you all brought your wine, and we can sit around and BS about whatever we'd like to BS. But I'm looking forward to the presentation. So even without Steve, I think this will be a pretty interesting meeting. He had to take his wife to the hospital, but it's not serious. But it was serious enough to go to the hospital. So I told him not to worry about it. He called me, and I said, "Yeah, obviously, we'll do fine without you." So here we are. James, anytime you want to go, if I
Okay,
didn't
just
catch you
waiting to get the cue there to start putting everybody to sleep.
unawares.
So yeah, I think Dave brought me in. He knows I work cheap, but I usually got something I can impart here, and probably going to give you a lot more information than you ever wanted to know about another phase of the Apollo 11 video program. I think a while back, maybe some of you caught my presentation on how they got video back from the moon. I call that the longest remote in television, television's longest remote, about a quarter of a million miles. And of course, that was a non-standard video. Had to be. They only had about half a megahertz transmission bandwidth from the surface of the moon back to the tracking stations on Earth. Tonight, I'm going to talk. There's 320 line, a 10 frame per second video. So tonight, I'm going to talk about color. And let me get started here, sharing my screen. If I can make this thing work. Things haven't gone away too badly. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see that. Up, it changed on me. I didn't want it to change. Yes, I'm apologizing to H.P. Lovecraft. I call this sort of tongue-in-cheek the color out of space. No, I'm not going to be talking about a meteor landing on a remote New England farm and all sorts of strange things happen. I would refer you to Lovecraft's book if you want that. I'm going to talk about how color was done uh, for the millions. I guess there were a few millions that had color TVs in 1969 in July. I will say this color was absolutely not possible from the surface of the moon at that time due to the bandwidth limitation I mentioned. However, there was more bandwidth in the command module, and let me get into that, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as I get in. So, basically, my subtitle here, how NASA, along with some help from some major companies, did provide color to the millions here in the U.S. And also, it was standards converted, went into Eurovision. I found out even the Soviets had bootlegged the feed, converted it to CCAM. So anybody with color capability that wanted to see live color from space during the Apollo 11 mission got to see it. And Apollo 11 wasn't the first time they put a color camera into the command module. It actually occurred a few months before that, I believe in May, during the Apollo 10 mission, when they just orbited the moon and came back without landing. Now, how did I get involved in this? Well, I'll come clean. No, I never worked for NASA, never had anything to do with NASA really, except watch what they put on TV, cheer there when we got a successful launch of a satellite and then a manned spacecraft. But what happened? I did broadcast engineering for the better part of 37 years. Decided it was time to hang that up and do something else. So I retired in August, first week in August of 2005. And just a few weeks later, I found myself sitting in the technology editor's desk at TV Technology magazine. Well, my boss liked to do a history piece occasionally, and he would ask me first of the year, is there anything to commemorate this year? The first time we did this was 2005. I'm sorry, 2006. And I said, yes, of course, the 50th anniversary of the showing of the first successful practical videotape machine, the Ampex VR 1000, at what was in the NARTB, now the NAB show in Chicago. So he would regularly ask me at the beginning of the year, is there anything we need to do along these lines? And 2009 comes along, and I said, yes, this is the 40th anniversary of what I'd like to refer to as television's longest remote. So I wound up that spring and summer, putting together, publishing 3 articles on the Apollo video program. Won't go into all that, but I did talk with some very interesting people, got to meet them along the way here, like I did in most of my stories involving history. And I'll explain that and introduce some of the people that I did run into in putting this story together. Now, as I said last time, I did a presentation on how the special Westinghouse camera provided video from the surface of the moon. A lot of limitations, a lot of hoops to jump through to make that happen, and especially some hoops here on Earth in converting this very non-standard 320 line progressive scan image into a 525 60 interlaced image that people could see. I'm not going to repeat that tonight. I'm going to go into the color part of the thing from the command module, as I said. Big question, since the video from the moon was monochrome, why did NASA really want to provide color? Well, very simple answer. This was 1969, and something had happened rather interesting just a few years before that. When I was a freshman in college that fall. NBC, fall season 1965, decided to break the egg in this chicken and egg situation that had existed since color really became a reality, compatible color, in late 1953. People didn't buy the sets because there was not enough color programming to justify spending the extra money for the color set. And the networks and local stations said, we're not going to do the shows in color, pay the extra production cost, buy the special equipment until there are enough color TVs out there in the audience to justify doing shows in color. So it was a very chicken and egg thing. NBC, I'm sure Sarnoff had a lot to do with this, but come the fall of 1965, everything NBC did, with the exception of 2 shows, which were already in the can, they had been shot on black and white film stock, but everything else was done in full color. So this really got people started buying TVs, stirred the TV stations up. They budgeted for color film processors, color film for their news departments, bought color cameras. Actually, the market for color television broadcast equipment was pretty much saturated, and sort of hard to get equipment. You sort of bought what was available. There was such a demand for it all of a sudden. Even looking at the coverage, now I did not have a videotape machine. Very few of us did in 1969 in July, but I did tape audio. And going back and reviewing, I found it interesting. CBS was pushing this color thing. Every time there was a cutaway for a commercial break or station ID, courtesy of the CBS, Walter Cronkite would bow down like this. It was an off camera announcer who would say CBS's television's continuing color coverage of the Apollo 11 mission, yada, yada. So they were pushing the fact they were doing color, again, getting people interested in color and selling some more sets. So there was a substantial number of color TVs out there. I'm sure more than it existed in the past decade, tuned in that night, looking to see what they could see in color. So yeah, NASA decided it was time to start adding color to some of their transmissions. Now, I'm going to go down in the noise here, way down in the weeds on some of these things, tell you more than you need to know. But as I started to say with this slide, in the words of the founder of that citadel of learning, academic excellence, Faber College. Its founder, Emil Faber, his motto was knowledge is good. So just keep that in mind. You're going to get a lot more than you bargained for. Well, I mentioned the 500 kilohertz limitation from the moon. Not going to talk about that anymore, I promise. But this limitation did not really exist between the command module and Earth. So let's see what we can do about getting color out of the module. Well, there were some issues, as I show here. We had only about 3 megahertz, as opposed to a little bit over 4, which is needed by a television station to transmit NTSC color. The color subcarrier being up about 3.58 megahertz and sidebands extending beyond that up a little above 4 on the high end. Also, you have to look at the camera size, weight, power, how much power this thing is going to take, and the operational complexity associated with cameras. These were all big factors about what was and what was not possible in terms of getting color video out of the command module. Just a quick review here. This is the channelization for 6 megahertz, US channel, analog TV, of course. And as I mentioned, you had your chroma information centered here on a 3579545 megahertz subcarrier. The INQ carriers here, subcarriers, modulated up. We shut off things here just about 4.1, so you don't interfere with the audio carrier, which is centered on 4.2. Now, obviously, if you've only got 3 megahertz, you're not going to get any color. Well, there was a workaround, even though we didn't use this in the NASA program. There was a workaround, and I'm bringing this up just out of historical interest about how you can, yes, indeed, send 358 color information. In other words, an NTSC color signal in a bandpass situation that's limited to 3 megahertz. Hello, your question? I thought I heard somebody there. Nope. Is somebody not muted, maybe? Okay, I'll keep going. So let's go back in time here. When color started late 1953, there was a big splash, New Year's Day 54, with NBC transmitting the first ever Tournament of Roses parade from Pasadena, coast to coast in living compatible color. There was some scrambling to be done because a good part of AT&T's initial connectivity among TV stations had been started in the L1 coaxial cable technology. L1s were only designed to pass about 3 megahertz. Actually, in truth, it was closer to about 2.7. Again, the rollout of L1 circuits was in 1941. Nobody really looked down into the future and saw what might be necessary. So there were a number of stations still being fed no more than 3 megahertz of video. Again, as I say, probably around 2.7. So it was up to RCA and AT&T to develop a methodology for getting around this limitation and getting this NTSC color signal with its 358 color information to stations connected by L1. And it's kind of interesting what happened here. I'll let you look at it. Again, the color information I talked about, the INQ carriers centered at close to 358, 3.6 here in this drawing. What you did, you filtered out, bandpass filtered out the chroma information up around the 358, 3.6 megahertz subcarrier, and you also rolled off your video to 2 megahertz. Then you took the color information, which you had bandpass filtered out, you heterodyned it down and stuck it just above the 2 megahertz, sort of a brick wall there on the video response. At the other end of the situation, you heterodyned it back up, moved it back up where it was supposed to be, and yes, you could do NTSC color that way. Same sort of thing was done in early video tape recorders, consumer, industrial, educational video recorders. If you go back and ever do a sweep, if you've got an operational Sony U-Matic and you do a video sweep, you will not find much at all video response above 2.25 megahertz. The way you did color in all of these, all the consumer, the beta VHS, the color was heterodyne down, filtered out heterodyne down, put down below, in those cases, 1 megahertz. It was called color under. So this is an old technology, really could have been used to do color if you had transmitted a full 358 NTSC signal from the Apollo command module. But as it turned out, it wasn't really necessary. I just bring this up in historical interest for the sake of historical interest. This is the whole diagram. If you want to follow through, I'm not going to go through everything, but this is the methodology block diagram for pulling out the chroma information, heterodyning it down, filtering video, adding it back in, transmitting it on this L1 cable, and doing the reverse operation to make again a composite color signal. Okay, let's look at the camera. I went over this pretty much, but I'll touch on it again. One of the big problems there, if you looked at the pictures of the command module, this is not a big spacecraft. Very limited amount of room, barely enough for the people and the equipment and the very primitive computing equipment they carried on board with them. Also, even though this thing was launched with a Saturn V, which I understand the thrust there is the equivalent to a small nuclear weapon when this thing is fired off, there's a limitation to what you can lift with this and put into orbit. Also, you're dealing with fuel cells, some solar cells, photovoltaics. You've got a limited amount of electrical power to power these sort of TV equipment. And one thing I had not really appreciated until I got into a project some years ago involving an airborne broadcasting platform, in this case, a cargo airplane, jet airplane, operating maybe 35,000 feet. You've always got waste heat when you run electrical equipment, and pretty easy to get rid of it here down at sea level. You blow on it, it goes away out there in the free space. You don't have that luxury when you don't have much atmosphere. So that's a consideration. Also, I mentioned operational simplicity. You wanted basically a camera that you could point and shoot. Astronauts, they're too busy just flying the mission to be trained on setting up a color camera, registering the three beams there, the three colors, overlaying everything, doing color balance, all the things that used to have to be done in bringing up a 3-tube color camera. Just reviewing some of the cameras, some of the hardware that was around in the mid to late 60s when NASA was getting serious about color. The first generation camera from RCA, TK41, it was a workhorse. These cameras were being used by NBC and others up into the early 70s. But you look at the head on this monster, it was 3 image orthicons, 3 3-inch IOs. The head weighed 300 pounds, a little more than that. Viewfinder added another 75 pounds. So it took 4 pretty hefty people to get this thing up on the pedestal. The support electronics filled a rack or so, the color plexer, the power supplies, the video processor. That amounted to another 300 pounds. And this thing pulled a little bit more than 2,000 watts. I'm sorry. I can't read the bottom of my slide here. 2,000 watts, 2 kilowatts. So obviously this is a non-starter when you want to do color from space. By the mid-60s, Norelco had solid stated things, came up with a second-gen camera, the PC60, which soon evolved into the PC70, 1-inch Plumicons, all solid state except for the pickup tubes. They managed to cut the weight down to about 270 pounds for everything, the processor chassis or the camera control unit, and the power consumption was down to about 400 watts. But again, it's still a non-starter. You're not going to take this into space. You look at the control panel on this thing. I mentioned operational simplicity. This is the setup and control panel for the Norelco PC70. These are concentric pots, most all of them. 2 of them are not. But when you count things up, there are 32 dual controls, 2 single controls, 66 adjustments that had to be made, sort of like a combination lock. I don't know how many of you have ever set up a tube color camera, but yeah, I did this on a daily basis for a goodly number of years. Even when you get good at it, it takes several minutes to make acceptable pictures and to make the camera track a nice grayscale.
James?
So this, yes, you got a question?
Yeah, does everybody else see the screen sharing that James is working with? Because I've lost it.
I see it.
Okay, so I'm gonna log out and log in again and see
Okay.
if I can bring it up. I don't know why I'm not seeing it.
If anybody else has any trouble along those lines, please raise your hands.
All right.
I'm going to
thank you.
keep going here because I got a lot of slides in the slide deck.
Okay, well, I would love to see the slides. I don't know where
Okay.
they are.
Well, log out, come back, and
Okay, thanks.
this is
Will
being
do.
recorded anyway.
Okay.
It's
So-
on YouTube also.
Oh, okay.
Okay, moving right along. Again, astronauts had better things to do than set up color cameras, 3-tube color cameras. So what to, well, if one I started to mention and I didn't, I lost my train of thought there. Sorry about that. Just before Apollo 10, Apollo 11, CBS Labs came up with something very revolutionary, their Minicam 6. It was the world's first portable camera. Again, Philips, Norelco picked up on this, partnered with CBS Labs, came out, they called it the PCP 60. Again, it was a portable camera, 3-tube Plumicon camera. Of course, by today's standards, hardly portable, but it was a good starting point. The head and the backpack weighed 50 pounds, so pity the poor person that had to carry this thing around for a football game or whatever that ran into overtime. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The signal had to be relayed back either by cable or by RF to a processor chassis, which again was basically a rack there with the monitoring and everything else. Again, remarkable though how the overall weight was cut to less than 200 pounds, and we're dealing just a little bit over between 600-700 watts to run everything. So step in the right direction, but still non-starter when you wanted to do color from the command module. Just reviewing here very quickly what goes on in a color camera. I'm sure I don't need to explain this. You are splitting light 3 ways, filters, dichroics. Norelco used prisms just to cut the amount of space, make things a little more compact, feeding 3 camera tubes, making an output that way when you're doing your scanning. So bottom line here, as I tried to drive home, weight, size, power requirements, operational complexity of even the smallest of the color cameras available in the late 60s were not practical for use in space. So NASA, its corporate partners there, Free Enterprise here in the US, they had to dig a little deeper and come up with something else. And here's where we go back into history, reinventing something that started long before anybody ever thought about putting a man on the moon. So this was a bit of history. I'm sure you've all heard of television's color war. There was a running battle for several years, a lot of hearings, FCC hearings, a lot of demonstrations between CBS, Peter Goldmark's field sequential color invention, and NBC, who didn't want to be put in second place by this upstart CBS, not known for manufacturing anything, and Peter Goldmark. They were working on developing a backwardly compatible color system. So this went on for several years until finally in 1950, the FCC gave the nod to CBS. However, it was not compatible with existing black and white TV sets. Whenever CBS turned the color on, they lost virtually all of their color audience. So this went on for a few months. Then CBS field sequential color went away, sort of. You had Peter Goldmark, who fathered this thing. It goes back to 1940. It was said on his honeymoon, he had a layover, and they honeymooned, he and his wife, in Canada. They had a long layover at a train station, I believe in Montreal, and there was a movie theater in the train station. They were showing Gone with the Wind. Goldmark had never seen a Technicolor movie. He was absolutely smitten with this idea of color and came back to New York. His job there at CBS as director of engineering for the television enterprise that Bill Paley wanted to start up, and asked the question, rhetorical question, why bother with black and white? Let's start with color television service. And the way he did this, I'm sure you're familiar with the scheme. He used a color filter wheel, an identical, smaller though, wheel there in front of the CRT at the TV receiver end of things. The wheel spun in synchronism when the red filter was in front of the the red filter was in front of the camera tube, the red filter was in front of the CRT, et cetera, et cetera. And by persistence of vision, the eye and brain fuse this together to make a complete color picture. If you're not familiar with the scheme, here's a block diagram. Again, basically very simple, not much more difficult in technology than a black and white camera. Just the addition of the motor, the filter wheel, some synchronizing, a way to feed the color mixer. That's a misnomer. I'm not even going to go into that, but that was a way of balancing the colors. It actually separated the colors out so you could achieve color balance here at the transmitting end of things. Receiver, same thing. Your CRT, motor, filter wheel, motor control driven, kept in synchronization with what was going on at the camera end of the thing. Showing this diagram here to show you all of the interlace here that had to happen. You transmit an even field, odd field, red, even field, red, blue, blue, green, green. So you got 6 fields to get a full color picture. Just keep that in the back of your mind. It makes things a little messy when Goldmark tried to do what he wanted to do. This is what he found trying to use 525 60 field or 30 frame per second television standards. To transmit these 6 fields, it takes 1/10 of a second to get everything in and make a complete color frame. This is way too slow for other than just sort of a jerky motion. Remember the 10 frame per second video coming off the moon, how sort of strange that looked. So that doesn't work. Also, he encountered some very serious flicker issues when you were transmitting primary colors, because these are only illuminated every third feet. If you would speak of illumination, you register light off say, a red object in a picture. And these are only sent every third field or 20 times per second. Again, very, very serious flicker. This is if Goldmark had tried to fit his field sequential into a conventional 6 megahertz 525 60 field scenario. Didn't work. So he juggled things a little bit to come up with something that did work, did look fairly good. He raised the field rate up to 144 fields per second. Again, 2 red, 2 blue, 2 green, even and odd. When you put all that together, you get 24 color frames per second. But you can't fit this into a 6 megahertz channel. You've raised the field rate, the amount of information you're trying to push through this 6 megahertz channelization. So to make this fit, he had to lower the line count by 120 lines down to 405. So you lost that much vertical resolution. However, if any of you have seen CBS Field Sequential Color, this is a recreation of it there at the Early Television Foundation Museum. I was privileged to be there when this was first shown. Goodness knows how many years ago. I know I made a special trip out there. I'd been at NAB all week. I had maybe 3-4 hours sleep, got on the road here from Washington, made a beeline there because they were going to wake up a couple of these field sequential color sets that had been restored and synthesize a 405 line 144 field signal. So it doesn't look that bad other than the loss of resolution. Okay, that's the past is prologue. Let's get down to the present, or at least 1969 present. So just a comparison of the standards of the black and white television that existed, which later morphed into 525 backwardly compatible color and Goldmark system. Again, totally incompatible there if you try to look at one on the other receiver. So to make things a little easier, Apollo color, because of the extra bandwidth they did have on the command module, they were able to transmit 525 line 60 field television. Now I say 60 fields. Actually, I'm talking 59.94 because of the reduction that had to be done in both line and field for other reasons, which I'm sure you're aware of in the NTSC backwardly compatible signal. But just to make things easier here, I'm going to call it 60 instead of 59.94. But there were some differences here in what was going on the camera there on the spacecraft. Now, this is where Richard O'Brien, who became ultimately director of engineering at CBS Television, I got to meet him. The late Ed Wright 10 coerced me into making Dick O'Brien's acquaintance. Dick was in his late 80s when I met him. It seems that Ed had come across something that I had not even heard about at that time. It was an invention by Peter Goldmark to try to keep his field sequential color system alive even after CBS gave up on it in terms of transmitting color and joined the second NTSC and helped come up with this backwardly compatible NTSC color that the FCC approved in late 1953. O'Brien, as it turns out, as a young technician or young engineer, I'm not going to say technician, he was a degreed engineer. He had a master's in engineering from Stanford, but he was given the job of evaluating this technology that Goldmark had developed. It was called the chromacoder. I call it the last gasp. Again, Goldmark is trying to keep his field sequential color scheme alive, and this is the way he did it. He touted this as a much more economical, compact way of generating NTSC color. He took a black and white camera, again, used his color filter wheel. You had circuitry there to gate out the colors. When it was red, red was sent to a particular CRT, small CRT, blue, blue, green, green. And these were picked up by conventional camera tubes. Dick O'Brien told me that the scans on the CRTs and the scans on the pickup tubes were offset by 90 degrees to avoid line pairing and a Moiré type effect. Okay, again, the camera tube is looking at only the red signal. When the red is being gated out of this field sequential signal, it's producing a solid red signal. You feed this in the blue and the green into a conventional NTSC encoder, and bingo, you've got a legal NTSC backwardly compatible color signal. Now, as I say, Goldmark touted this as a much more compact way of doing color, and certainly it was. This is one of the few surviving pictures of Goldmark's television camera. This was made by General Electric, basically a production image orthicon 3-inch IO black and white camera with the addition of the filter wheel and some synchronizing circuitry. Now I counted there are 12 filter segments, not quite sure. I never found any technical information on this, but I'm sure there was a reason. But you see the size of the camera here, 20 inches high, 26 inches deep, certainly nothing like the big honking TK40, TK41 that RCA come up with. Shot here comparing the chromacoder camera with another camera. I thought first this might be one of the Princeton cameras from RCA, but it looks like GE logos on the cameras. Unfortunately, the resolution of the picture is not that great, but this does give you some idea of the difference in size between the two cameras, the 3-tube camera, the 1-tube camera, both making NTSC color. Now, Dick O'Brien, this was the reason that Ed Wright 10 had pushed me into this relationship with Ed. I called the guy cold, told him who I was. Come to find out, his home there in Westchester County, New York, was not that far from where my wife grew up. So we made a trip up, and yes, I spent some time on several occasions with Dick O'Brien, and he told me all about this. He actually showed me the notebook where he evaluated the performance in the two cameras. And unfortunately, the 3-tube camera really ran circles around the chromacoder camera in terms of resolution, in terms of signal to noise, other parameters. Something interesting too, Dick told me that the chromacoder existed in Goldmark's laboratory on one of the upper stories there of the CBS broadcasting operation in New York City. Dick said he nor any other of the engineers associated with the operations, actually telecasting shows, were allowed in Goldmark's private lab. The signals from the chromacoder camera, the coax, was sent up to Goldmark's lab. That's where the chromacoder existed. The converted signals, the RGB, were sent back down. They were encoded in equipment there in the normal television operation and the lower area of the CBS building. I could not find a picture of the chromacoder. I did find something interesting though. It seems that chromacoder technology was tried in the UK, and this is what it looked like there, this iteration. You see the 3 cathode ray tubes up here, the 3 cameras, again, shooting into the cathode ray tubes to develop the RGB signals. So I'm sure they found the same limitations that Dick O'Brien found with the Goldmark chromacoder. And enter Stan LaBar. If you saw my first presentation here on the black and white video from the moon, you know who Stan LaBar was. If not, I will tell you. He was the project manager that developed the Westinghouse camera that went aboard the spacecraft there, was carried by Neil Armstrong on the moon, made the first pictures relayed back to Earth. Very specialized camera, used a specialized imaging tube from Westinghouse, a secondary electron conduction tube. Tube had a tremendous amount of dynamic range, which was needed on the moon. Also, it operated very well in low light levels. Stan LaBar wrote an article. I find this interesting. It was published here after the fact. It was called "The Color War Goes to the Moon." So the color wars of the late 40s, early 50s is being fought again to a degree there. You've got to get a color signal out of the command module. You can't use the color cameras that RCA developed or anybody else really and truly. So we're going to go back in time and do the color war thing again. And I actually got in sort of a color war after I published my article about color. I had spent an afternoon with Stan LaBar at his home interviewing him. The information that went in the article came from Stan LaBar. And just as soon as that issue of the magazine hit the stand, so to speak, people started reading it. I got an email and a phone call both from a gentleman at CBS Labs. I'm going to talk about him in a few minutes. That was Renville McMahon. Again, the camera that was developed for black and white and the color camera that Westinghouse developed used this SEC, secondary electron conduction tube, developed, invented by Westinghouse. I won't go into more detail about the tube. This is the camera that Westinghouse produced, the field sequential camera, the modern version of Goldmark's camera. This is a viewfinder, if you will, small monitor that was needed by the astronauts so they could frame and zoom and focus. Those were the only controls on the camera. Stan told me this was basically an off-the-shelf Japanese monitor, which had been updated in terms of some of the components to make it meet mill spec. CRT box is the same, some of the other circuitry, but Westinghouse did make some changes to that little Japanese TV there to make it serve reliably as a monitor viewfinder for the color camera. Here are the final specs on the camera. They got the weight down, camera, monitor, lens, everything, a little bit over 15 pounds. And my goodness, the camera and the monitor together only consumed about 21 watts. This is a picture, the only picture I've been able to find of the 6-segment color wheel that went into the camera. It does not look red, blue, green here. Maybe something had faded before the picture was taken. Maybe it was just the lighting. Maybe it was a reproduction of the picture. It looks almost like yellow instead of green, at least to my eyes. But
one note.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I asked the same question of Cliff Benham and Stanley Barr, and the reason is they were using a dichroic filter that reflects the opposite color from the filtered color.
Okay, so that's what we're seeing. We're seeing light reflected back.
Exactly.
Again, I never saw that explained anywhere. But again, they really don't look red, blue, green. They look more cyan, magenta, and yellow to me. So that would certainly fall in line with what you're saying. And something interesting Stan did tell me about the filter wheel, the drive mechanism. Westinghouse first went to Bulova to develop a watch type mechanism to drive this thing. I say 60, but it was really 59.94. He said Westinghouse had spent something in the neighborhood of $100,000 with Bulova to develop this before they finally dumped it and went ahead with their own drive mechanism. You see, it's a geared mechanism, a small motor here. I understand it was pulse driven just to reduce power consumption. Now, I mentioned Renville McMahon. Interesting person. He's the person that called me taking issue with some of the things that appeared in print attributed to Stan LeBar. Again, right out of Stan LeBar's mouth. I quoted him directly. Renville did not like some of the things that Stan said. So I got sort of in the middle of this crossfire when the color war was going again there in 2009, believe it or not. And both Renville McMahon and Stan LeBar sent me corroborating evidence about their position in developing the camera. Stan did not give CBS Labs much credit for developing the camera. However, I did find a copy of the Westinghouse manual for the Westinghouse field sequential camera used on Apollo, and they do credit CBS Laboratories. They do credit Renville McMahon for playing a large part in developing the camera. This is a picture I shot of Renville there at his home in Connecticut with one of the color wheels that CBS Labs had experimented with back in the day. So just wanted to bring that in. Now, this is a signal developed by the camera, a red, blue, green, again, 1/60th a second. Actually, it's 1/59.94, but just for sake of making this thing go faster, yeah, 1/60th of a second. So in 1/20th of a second, you had all your colors for one field go by. Keep that in mind. Big problem is converting this field sequential signal, even though it was 52560, into an NTSC signal that can be viewed, transmitted by the networks, viewed by all of the people with color TVs. So one of the things you really want, you could have used the chromacoder technology. However, this is what was done basically with the black and white 320 line imagery coming out of the moon camera. And you were shooting a CRT with a camera. You're taking a picture of a picture, you're blocking up contrast, or you're losing resolution, degrading the picture. So NASA, I think, pushed a little bit harder on the companies. And again, I've never found out who made this converter to convert the field sequential to NTSC, but I think RCA may have played a big part in it because of some of the technology used. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But again, the chromacoder could have been used, or a modern version of it, but I think they wanted a little bit better color. And by that time, something else had happened. We had a way of storing a full television field. In reviewing information for this presentation, I went back into the Bible there on color television early on, color TV in general, and especially NTSC by John Wentworth. Now, I got to meet John Wentworth many years later. At that time, he was head of the RCA Broadcast Products Training Institute there in Camden. The operation I was associated with bought quite a bit of RCA gear. I went to a goodly number of training sessions, usually a week long there in Camden, and got to meet John, sit down and talk with him. I was amazed there when I first read the book. I thought he had played a big part in developing NTSC color. Actually, he let his hair down to me. I'm passing this along. He said, "No, I did not." Said, "My part in this was to stay in the lab all day, talk with the engineers, with the scientists there at RCA who were working on color. And at the end of the day, I would go meet with RCA's corporate lawyers and put all this down to see what could be patentable." That was my part in this, but he did have a very, very excellent feel for what really went into NTSC color and color television in general. Enough so that this color television engineering book he published in 1955, as I say, did become sort of the Bible of the industry. I know I was really, really glad when I finally was able to get a copy. But this is a passage out of the book. He is talking about field sequential color early on. And I think it's an interesting statement of the situation that existed in the early to mid 1950s. He said, we really cannot give serious consideration, even a theoretical possibility of using storage devices to delay the incoming signals, the red, blue, green signals, one until the other two have been received, and then producing a simultaneous signal. This is what was done, but certainly not without storage in the chromacode. He said, because the development of such storage devices would revolutionize the television industry. Fast forward, of course, in the age of digital, you do this quite easily. You convert an analog signal into a digital signal, a bunch of numbers, you store them, you clock them out as needed. You can store all sorts of things, take it out at leisure. But 1955, this didn't exist. 1969, it really didn't exist, as I mentioned, in digital, but Ampex had developed something that looks like it would work. And I think RCA may have grafted this Ampex technology into this color converter, the field sequential color to NTSC, just as they did for the 320 line black and white imagery coming off the camera that Armstrong carried on the moon with him. They used the HS-100 slow-mo machine. It was strictly an analog device developed by, excuse me, losing my voice here, Ampex, at the behest of ABC for slow-mo stop-action shots and their sports broadcast. This is the machine. I don't know if you've ever seen one, full rack here. It could record 30 seconds, 525 60 video, 900 frames, operated on 120 volt service, but did take a dedicated 30 amp circuit through a little over 3.5 kilowatts, weighed 800 pounds, and cost, as you see here, 110,000, which is more than $1 million in today's money when you figure in inflation. But this was a nucleus of the black and white conversion and also the color conversion. Here is a picture, Ampex publicity picture, if you will, showing the machine back here. You do see the ABC Sports logo there. The platter, the disc on which the analog video was stored, and a controller for this. One of the things which is really fuzzy, because I could not find a manual for the modified HS-100, you needed to record and play back 3 different colors, red, blue, green, obviously. And I am not sure they make a reference to multiple record heads. I'm really not sure you could fit multiple record heads above that magnetic platter. Maybe you had multiple platters on a spindle. Who knows? Maybe NASA went ahead and said, use 3 of these things. We will never know. I don't think the one converter that was made, I found that there was only one made. It was installed, I believe, in Houston. NASA fed the networks color from this. But here's the operation that happened in this, storing these color fields. You erased, you got a clean track. You wrote your color signal down 1/60th of a second. It was just held in readiness. You read it when it was time. You could read it 3 times. Again, I'm going to explain that in a second. Then you erased and started all over. Each operation took 1 revolution of the disk, or 1/60th of a second. Here's a block diagram of the conversion system. Again, you had your field sequential signal from the spacecraft. You had a 1x6 switcher, which was gating out even and odd color fields, red, red, blue, blue, green, green. These were fed in, recorded on the disk recorder, or multiple platters of a disk recorder, maybe multiple recorders, control circuitry to synchronize everything. And you had 3 2x1 switches taking color feeds, or taking feeds representing these color signals, combining them. So you had a solid red, solid blue, solid green, no matter what was coming in from the camera at a given instance. I would hate it to have been the poor engineer that had to design this control circuitry. You're going to see why in just a second. This is a sequence, again in time. These are the red, blue, green, odd field, even field, odd field, even field signals coming out of the camera. Again, you see the sequence of operations. I'm starting with red here. You erased, you wrote red, this odd field red. You held it, you read it, you read it, you read it. Now you're reading it 3 times for a purpose. You erased, you started over. Same with blue, same with green, and then your even fields. So here's what happens. why you need three reads. You look after six cycles, 6 revolutions here, you now have all three colors ready to feed out and be encoded. If you switch those out with those 2x1 switchers I talked about on the output. Next cycle, again, you've got all three color signals to feed and encode into NTSC. The next cycle, you've got all three here. Again, you've got all three. You repeat. They're little different places, but you see where I'm going with this. So again, a lot of work, I'm sure, before you were able to do this in software, went into this hardware controlled circuitry to make this happen, but it did work. Now, we've covered that. One other thing I want to cover, and this is sort of strange. You don't normally think about this. Today's age, everybody has a PiPan satellite dish, but this was back before we did much with geosynchronous geostationary satellites. This involves Doppler. Yes, Doppler exists. I don't know how many of you grew up in railroad towns. I did. There were 2 main railroad lines that crossed at 90-degree angles in my town, and there were always trains going through. There always are. And if you're at the station, you could hear the pitch of the train's whistle or train's horn changing. Again, the sound waves are being compressed as the train comes into the station. The pitch is higher. As it leaves, they're stretched out and it falls lower. Same sort of thing happens with radio signals. Up in space, satellites moving. I know this hit home. First time I ever saw a satellite signal being downlinked. This was out at KSTP television, big operation by Hubbard in St. Paul. I had a friend who was working there. I got a tour of the station. Again, this was, I think, 1972. They were doing something quite unusual. They had built a tracking system for tracking National Oceanographic weather satellites, which were being used at the time. These were non-geosync orbits. The satellite moved into acquisition, went out. They had cobbled up an antenna, a Yagi, a couple of TV rotators so they could track as over L. A person manually moved the antenna, the rotor controllers, to keep the satellite centered as it made its pass. And one of the interesting things, there was a receiver with a center scale meter. And this operator was constantly changing the frequency of the receiver to compensate for Doppler as the satellite went in and out of acquisition. This was recorded on ordinary audio tape, fed into a Tektronix scope with a camera, Polaroid camera. They recorded each pass, made a picture of it, pasted the pictures up as a composite, and used it on the evening news that evening. Nobody else in the market was doing it. Very few other operations, even at network level, were that ambitious at the time. But yeah, this hit home that Doppler does exist with moving spacecraft. So you had the same sort of thing you had to compensate for with the Apollo color. Well, how did you do this back then? Well, you brought in 2 very expensive, very big 2-inch quadruplex video recorders. I'm assuming from Ampex. Here's the situation. The record machine received the signal from the satellite. Again, this is changing in frequency. The information, i.e. the video, the sync pulses modulated on the video are also getting changed as the satellite moves in and out of acquisition. It doesn't really matter. The record machine is looking for sync pulses, locks up the servo system in the machine based on the sync pulses coming in. So you record this. There was a 10-second tape loop. The second machine played back the video. This was referenced to a very stable sync generator. So you produced very stable output video. This is how they compensated for Doppler. And just to be cute, this is something Stan LaBar shared with me. They wanted something, I guess, akin to the Peacock, show off their color camera. So they, pardon me, I'm losing my voice 1 second. They decorated Snoopy in a space suit, and this is what they used. I don't know why I'm not able to change slides all of a sudden. Okay, there we go. So, in parting, I want to say that delivering color television images from space, from the moon, I'm thinking the Artemis expedition, which is supposed to happen in the next year or so, if it does, will be a heck of a lot easier next time. You're going to be seeing high dynamic range video. You're going to be seeing high definition video coming off the moon, and you're not going to be dealing with this very clunky, as we look at it back now from 60 years, clunky technology used in 1969. That's all I have. I will take questions. I got to clear my throat, get my voice back. So anybody has a question, please go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing.
I just want to thank you, James. That was an impressive sequence. Thank you for all of the information. I really enjoyed it.
Well, you're quite welcome. I know some of this is basic to some of us, but for others, maybe this is the first time they've run across the chromocoder, some of these other technologies I talked about. I was really, I almost forgotten about this early L1 coaxial connectivity, the limitation there, and this color under conversion technology that was developed by RCA, and I'm assuming AT&T long lines to get color to the stations. Again, it didn't have to be used to overcome this 3 megahertz limitation in the getting the signals back from the command module, but it could have if it had been needed. So I learned a little something here too, rediscovered some things I had run across years ago and forgotten about.
It's nice to see, even if we all know this, it's nice to walk down the memory through it, because revisiting it reminds us of things that we take for granted today, as you made reference to with the digital world, because we take all of this for granted.
Oh my goodness, just look, a smartphone there. Again, 2K, 4K resolution, I guess, in some of them. Infinite recording capability there using the cloud. Just it's amazing what you can do with something you can carry in your pocket. And you look at what they had to do working against the limitations of the analog technology at the time in the late 1960s, culminating again in 1969 when they first did color from an Apollo command module.
I thought this was really fascinating, James, and thank you for doing it.
I'm glad to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, one of the things that struck me is you had a picture of a GE camera that CBS had changed out to be color. I always thought they used TK11s, frankly, and I think they did at some point. But that looked like one of the GE cameras that Dumont actually made, because they were the OEM supplier for GE cameras. So
well, it was a GE. I'm not sure whose factory it was made in, but it was branded GE.
Right.
And Dick O'Brien told me these were GE cameras that Goldmark had modified for his chromocoder, as I called it, the last gasp of field sequential color project he undertook there at CBS.
I was just wondering because it seemed odd, and I know Dumont actually Dumont had a color field sequential system back in 1947 rather, but it wouldn't fit in 6 megahertz. It took about 10 megahertz. But it was
for obvious reasons. I mentioned
exactly.
the flicker.
Well, yeah, but they actually had one. I've got a brochure on it. I would like to have one, but I just thought it was interesting. I wonder, somehow a lot of this stuff has a lot of real common roots to various companies that were early pioneers, and I just kind of really it just amazes me what these guys thought up and came up with. That's all.
Well, I'll pass along something I learned here several years ago. I reviewed a book by not a retiree from RCA, but by an engineer who had worked there beginning about the time they created the Sarnoff Research Center in Princeton and left in the late 1940s. And he recalled his experiences there and talked about RCA developing color. And RCA did not start with electronic color. They started with field sequential color, just like Goldmark, and actually even worked out a stereoscopic, a 3D color system using field sequential technology. So sort of interesting. I don't think much has ever been published or written about that except in this one account.
It's like a deep, dark secret from the past.
James, thank
Yes.
you for the complete system review from input to output. It's really good. I, like you, I wish there was clear information on what was in that disk converter. I always had it in the back of my mind that they might have used a single disk and slowed it down to 20 hertz and used 3 read heads, but I don't really know.
Yeah, well, Stan LeBar said, the disk was spun at 5994 just to make it easier to do the conversion, just to keep things straight. Because again, you're not really too worried about this flicker situation, whatever else, since you're storing, reading out, a continuous red, a continuous blue, continuous green, and feeding the NTSC encoder. So this is sort of interesting. I found it very interesting. They went to Bulova to come up with this drive mechanism and spent this very large amount of money, $100,000. That has to be well over $1 million in today's inflated dollar valuation, and then decided to dump this and go ahead and do something else.
I have a question. This is Terry here.
Sure.
A question with regards to the 5994, because logically, because there's of course no frame storage in those days, the frequency reference for the frame rate would have to originate from the moon or the command module.
Yeah.
So they would have to make it as close, probably with a crystal reference oscillator, to 5994 as possible, and they could not synchronize 5994 or change it when it was on the Earth. So it would have to be as close to that as possible. So the question is how close it was to that. And I suppose all of us remember in the early days of network television, when they were cutting from local affiliates to the network, they would dip to black and you'd experience picture rolls and things like that because of the lack of synchronization. So what I would suspect is because the Luma and the Chroma are band separated, there's no worry about chroma interleaving. So RCA for the color converter would simply generate as close, or the 3.58 megahertz color reference on Earth, and let the video be as close as possible to the correct rate. And just following on this is just interesting, because I remember years ago discussing at length with, you remember Charlie Rhodes at Tektronix. And he published in SMPTE, I think it was in the SMPTE journal in about 1995, an article about 60 hertz NTSC. And his proposal was to move away from 5994 in the 90s, that the broadcasters should abandon 5994 and let NTSC run with the same color subcarrier, but allow some discretion with the interleaving of the chroma properly, so that it would actually move. We'd be able to move forward with 60 hertz frame rates and not 5994. So this follows in line with what I think they must have done in 1969, which is the RCA converter would be an accurate color subcarrier, but the frame rate could vary somewhat from 5994, might even have been 60.
Let me address a little bit of this and put the remarks by Charlie Rhodes into some perspective, if I can. I really can't speak for Charlie. I knew him, a brilliant man, very nice person. I edited his column. He did a column for TV Technology magazine. I knew him outside of the world of publications, though. What I was going to say, I think when he published this, I believe he headed up the Advanced Television Testing Laboratory in Alexandria here. And I think he was talking about high definition television, moving to a high definition television platform where we could jiggle the standards, try to bring everything up, get away with this non-integer field and frame rate that we had been locked into ever since 1953 when the FCC approved NTSC color. I think that's, again, that's a perspective that needs to be considered in. I know I did read a paper from Charlie and I've not been able to locate this. I've looked and looked. I thought it might have been published in SMPTE, the SMPTE Journal, but I've not been able to find it there. But he talks about taking a production television, I believe an RCA 630 TS, and again, modifying a color signal. So again, the line and feel were really 52560. And how really bad this thing looked in terms of interference with the subcarrier being produced, because he was not using the 3575, 9545 megahertz subcarrier. He was using something else and allowing the field and frame rate to stay at what was done in monochrome. Yeah, it did make a picture, but yeah, you did have interference between the audio subcarrier, the 4.5 megahertz subcarrier, and the chroma in the picture. And he summed things up saying the people back when they pounded out the NTSC specification really must have been aware of this, using state-of-the-art equipment, i.e. this post-war television set, and what would happen if you tried to maintain the line and feel which they had been using, and again, using a subcarrier other than 3.579.545. I think that's where that came in. Also, you mentioned the role, the breakup there when the local stations were joining networks. Well, there was certainly a way of overcoming this. And I will say the crystal technology, the crystals that were being used even in the 1960s were very, very stable. So I would have to imagine that's what was in the camera, just a very good, very carefully aged massage crystal there to produce the correct correct line and feel frequencies for the scanning in that camera on board the spacecraft. I know Bulova, maybe this is why Westinghouse first went to Bulova. Bulova developed the Accutron watch, which was guaranteed to be accurate within a minute a month using a tiny tuning fork, if you remember those ads. Well, I know somebody who took issue with this. He did a lot of testing on 3 different Bulova watches, and no, the watch slewed a lot more than a minute a month. But be that as it may, maybe that's why Westinghouse abandoned this. But a crystal, again, a state-of-the-art crystal in 1969 would have certainly been very stable even in space. And what I was going to say, no, the television stations did not have to break up there when they went out of network, went into network. All they had to do is genlock their local sync generator to the signal coming in from the network. Again, then you were right in time with ABC, NBC, CBS, whoever was feeding your signal from New York or Hollywood there, and you could you could dissolve, you could do anything you did with a signal being produced in-house, so to speak. However, there was one fallback. You did not want to stay genlocked 100% of the time, because sometimes the network would stop sending signals to the stations, or they would make an asynchronous switch in New York, or AT&T would pull a patch, and you would lose this reference. And if you were recording, machines, of course, the tape machines, the videotape machines, are being referenced by the sync pulses produced by your local generator. And if you were genlocked, you lose this outside reference signal, i.e. the network signal. You lose it even for a fraction of a second. The local generator, sync generator, has to reframe, has to reestablish its relationship. And the tape machine, again, the servos just go absolutely bonkers. And yeah, you're recording, you're going to have a really bad recording to the point you're going to have to go back and start all over again. So you did not want to leave your station sync generator genlocked to network any longer than you absolutely had to. I know we, at the network affiliates I worked at, you really didn't do this except when you were going to a local break, you wanted a smooth transition, or say you're carrying a basketball game. You didn't want to interrupt. There was no break, but you needed to be legal, needed to keep legal, and again, provide an identification to the station. You wanted to superimpose an ID, WTNH TV New Haven, say over the basketball game coming in from ABC. So you would genlock, again, make sure you're not recording anything at the time in the station, You would genlock, do your super, come out, then ungenlock, and you didn't have any problems. Yeah, that didn't have to be a problem, but yeah, I know where you're coming from because I've seen it many times. And before RCA developed genlocking, yeah, you could not do a nice smooth synchronous transition between network or even a remote signal coming into the station from a remote truck with local sync. Enough said.
Okay, can I
One
just
comment about
oh, go ahead.
the time differences. I think one of your drawings showed, well, first of all, if you record on the HS100 and play it back, is it going to be um, played back at a different time? I don't think so. But you showed where two machines, one was recording with a big loop of tape and then being played back. And that way you came out 59.94 no matter what. And it matched what everybody else was. And it was basically, you got 10 seconds, 20 seconds of tape loop there that you're basically doing a delay, but you got everything coming out of that synchronous with your house.
Right. Again, the basic purpose of the two videotape machines were to sort of overcome, not sort of, but to overcome the problem you had with Doppler shift, because the spacecraft is moving and the frequency of the information modulated on it is changing. But it doesn't matter. The record machine is locking up on the sync pulses coming down from the spacecraft. Again, you delayed there just slightly, so you didn't get ahead of yourself. You didn't jerk the tape out of one machine into another. You had sort of a mechanical buffer there with this tape loop, and you played back. And of course, as I said, the playback machine was locked to a very stable signal source, the house sync generator, or in this case, the network sync generator, and you had very stable signals. The hard drive there, I say hard drive, the disk recorder was basically used so you had a constant source of red, constant source of blue, constant source of green signals. Again, I said after 6 cycles, you always had red coming out of red even, red odd fields, blue blue, green green. You had converted these bursts of color coming in sequentially from the field sequential camera into something that was always there for the NTSC coder to work from. That's what was happening there. It did not have to be that synchronous. Again, the playback machine did solve all of the problems, a 2-inch quad machine.
Now, did the output of the encoder from the RGBs that had to be vertically locked to what was coming in vertically from the space? And how was the 358 used in that? How was that generated in that? You basically genlock a sync generator was coming in from sync. I'm just wondering how that was.
Right. Again, you've asked a very interesting question. I didn't see that in any of the information that I was able to find on this technology. But I would assume here you had a sync generator which was looking at pulses coming down from space, a sync generator which was genlock, and that was referencing everything here for this very complex switching sequencing operation there associated with the slow-mo, the HS100 slow-mo machines in terms of the write, read, erase, hold cycles that I mentioned. So I assume that's how that worked. Again, I did not run across an explanation of that. And unfortunately, if this machine exists someplace, it's probably like that box there in one of the movies, the holy grail of what it's stored in this big government warehouse somewhere gathering dust. It really should have gone to the Smithsonian or someplace because they're a one-of-a-kind machine. I think RCA made several of these standards conversion units there to convert the 320 line black and white signal into 52560. But as far as I was able to discern, there was only one of these color converters built. And goodness knows if that still exists or parted out or sold as surplus. 60 years ago, kind of hard to follow. It's like the lost recordings there of the Apollo mission. The actual 320 line recordings done on one track of an instrumentation machine. And the assumption is that somebody checked the tapes out of National Archives, got the biometric data they wanted, command module position data, whatever they were looking for, on this multi-track tape, not aware there was slow scan video there, and they got the tape for reuse. So, who knows? Maybe the tapes are still there, maybe they're not. But this is what Stan LeBar and another NASA person decided after looking for these tapes, even going to Australia, looking for these tapes for over a year. They never found them. So this color converter may be out there somewhere, but who knows where?
Yeah,
How many HS100s were they using? Just one? Or
well, as I said, you look at the drawings, you look at the diagrams that I found, it looks like one machine. But knowing a little something about the HS100, I am not sure how you could fit these multiple heads on that machine. As I said, it may have been multiple platters on one spindle, or it could have been multiple HS100 machines. Again, when they were putting a man on the moon within the decade, as Kennedy promised, I think the sky was a limit on what they could spend to do this. So they may have well bought, multiple HS100 machines. But I would kind of have to think it was multiple Ampex made a model with multiple magnetic disc or platters on a common spindle. I don't know this, but it just logically it looks like that's what would have had to be done, rather than trying to jam these multiple read-write heads above one platter.
Could I say something about that?
Sure.
I was doing parallel research, and I have a web page on the downlink station, and I also did research, helped out a group that was doing research on this from Mexico. The machine that they were talking about, I saw a drawing of it. I think it was Popular Mechanics, and I modified that and reused it on my web page, and then I drew the heads. There were four heads, four platters on the machine.
Okay, I never found that. You're way ahead of me there.
Yeah, well, there's a mystery though. There are 6 operations that have to go on simultaneously, so you have to have 6 platters, not 4. And I've asked that question, but nobody seems to know if it was 2 machines that they were using, two heads, 2 platters on one machine, and 4 on the other, or if it was one machine that Ampex modified just for this project. And I would love to see that machine, just like you would. The other thing that's really interesting about this is you're supposed to only keep the head over a section of the track for a certain amount of time. I think it's up to 30 seconds or something. But the heads never moved during this whole process. They didn't have time to move the heads. They were always repeating the same 6 steps. So that means that they had something that they discovered, that this machine could stay on the same parts of the disk for much longer than they said that in the specs that it could do.
Well, I think the heads, like again, data storage in a computer with a hard drive, the head is not really contacting the disk. It's just sort of flying over it with a very little thin film of air separating the head from the disk. Otherwise, you would destroy the coating on the disk in short order.
That's right. But we don't know exactly what
the 4 disc really is perplexing. I could see 3 discs using top and bottom, heads on the top, heads on the bottom to do the even odd fields, but 4, that just does not make a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I'm sure there must have been a reason for it. That's
4. I should have said 4 sides. Yeah, you're right.
How much time could the disc record in its standard use?
Standard use there, 30 seconds. That was about 900 fields you could put on a disc before you had to go back and overwrite it.
Okay, but wouldn't
so 30
that
seconds
mean
was fine for a football replay or something like this.
Wouldn't that mean that the head had to move across the surface of the disc during that 30 seconds?
There was no movement that I could detect. It was just covering the same spot. That was unique. And another thing it had to do was it had to convert every 3rd field from odd to even or even to odd, because you'd have the fields are coming in odd, even, or actually even, odd. And you have to have 3 R, B, and G being the same. So you have to convert one field. And what they did to do that, I figured out, was they threw away half a line.
Well, they did sort of the same thing, doing an interlace scan, this 320 line video. They had a delay line, which again was a half line delay, and they used a single HS100. If you saw my first presentation, and some fancy switching to do this half line delay and achieve a pseudo interlace from a progressive scan coming off the camera, the 320 line progressively scanned video. So yeah, that's probably the same thing, even though I didn't see this in any of the information I had on this color converter.
Well, they'd achieve a full frame after 6 scans.
Yeah.
So you're really going at 1/6 of the rate. So they saved a tremendous amount of information in the signal coming from the moon by doing that. But then they had to reproduce it with this disk system. And if you look at the pictures very carefully, and I have a sample on my website, you can see some color fringing, but it's not that bad. It's surprisingly better than you would think it would be. They could have saved even more, and I brought this up to Stanley Libar. They could have saved even more by using a system where they only use 2 colors. And for the moon being gray mostly, it probably wouldn't have made a lot of difference. And I have a comparison. The only thing that concerned me was it would be very hard to render the American flag accurately because it has a very red and a very blue. So I did a switch on my website where you can see the same picture of the American flag in 2 colors and then in 3 colors. And if you don't see them side by side, you actually can't notice a difference. So, and Stanley was interested, but he said, we only had so much time. We started designing this in 1965. And of course, some of the technology like the recorder, the disc recorder came along later. So they had to do it a certain way and they had to commit themselves right away and they didn't have a lot of time to fool around with things that were unproven. The Bulova thing it is a departure, and that was fascinating, but he swore me into secrecy. So I'm envious of you that you can report this because he didn't want that information getting out. He thought that conspiracy people would get hold of that and do something crazy with it like they had with just about everything else.
No, I conjecture, he didn't say this, but I conjecture it's because of Bulova's reputation at the time for having developed this Accutron watch move. And again, which turned out to be not that accurate over a long period of time.
He told me that it was NASA that put the kibosh on that and not Westinghouse.
Yeah, I got it, word Westinghouse, but again, after that many years, yeah, things do get mangled a little bit in memory and whatnot. But again, I interviewed Stan on the 40th anniversary, that was 2009. And I know he said one thing very significant and very sad when you think about it. He said every year since the moonshot in '69, there had been a reunion in Houston of the people who were involved. And he told me after the one before 2009, that was the last one. He said too many people had died. They figured they weren't going to be that many people left to carry this on, so they decided to shut it off there. So again, all this corporate memory, it was already dying off, already going away by 2009 when I did the story, when I interviewed Stan.
Well, he died about 2009 too, if I remember.
Yeah, he actually, I interviewed him there, I think in late spring, early summer. He went into the hospital that December, I think it was, for a relatively minor procedure and did not make it out.
Yeah, I'd written him and his wife got back to me and she said, no, he's gone. And
Well,
wow.
we had him at the I think it was the 2009 early television convention, and he talked about the black and white moon camera, and he said, "Yeah, I'll be back, and we'll go into the color camera," but that never happened. So that was a big loss on our parts.
Yeah, I told him about Cliff Benham's research, and he was fascinated to hear that. But I have a website that says that the moon cams weren't chromocoder; they were in fact color tell in reverse. And Cliff made a color tell camera that proved the point that you could convert directly between, say, a moon cam and a regular television set without going through all this goofing around. You'd still have to have the Doppler correction. but you could eliminate most of the work that you did past the Doppler. You still have to add on the chroma subcarriers and all that were missing from the moon signal. But going through, you wouldn't have to go through the disk recorder probably. And Cliff hooked up this camera that he built to a color wheel and or to a regular television even, and you can see the pictures. It works. So it's really color tell. It can't be CBS because CBS was 144 fields instead of 60, and color tell was 1 foot in CBS and 1 foot in NTSC, and made that conversion. And of course, it has flicker, just like the downlink station saw in Australia. They had a rigged up Conrack monitor that was operating, and they could get the moon signal directly and just accept the flicker, but they could get the color pictures.
I remember when Stan, we took him in to meet Cliff over by his exhibit in the museum, and he stuck his hand out and he said to Cliff, he says, "I've been wanting to meet you." And Cliff's jaw just hit the ground. He says, "You wanted to meet me?" But that was that was fun.
Yeah, I think that was why. I think I'd mentioned it, Cliff's work in an email to Stanley, and I think that might have gotten it rolling. But I'm so glad that they could do that, and I wish I had been there to see that. That's a wonderful story. It really is, Dave.
I'm curious about the disc. And what was it? Slow-mo? The person holding the disc, it looks shiny, metallic. Was that coated, or was it some kind of weird disc? Was that a standard disc from computers at the time? Or was that specially made with some kind of coating on it for that purpose? Was that a typical disc or specialized? It's that reflection. Normally, when you look at a disc.
Well, I never worked with the HS-100, but I do know that was a very special disc.
Yeah.
Very, very highly polished and
Yeah.
very easily damaged. I have a computer drive disc about the same size. It looks basically just like the reddish brown oxide you'd find on audio tape.
Exactly. Right.
So the MPEX disc was very, very specialized. Again, to minimize dropout, it was an analog thing. I think it was probably some sort of a very high coercivity magnetic material, maybe chromium dioxide. I don't know this, but I'm just surmising this may have been what it was. But I do know it was very special. I've talked with people working in sports trucks. Yeah, when the discs were damaged, and there was hell to pay because it was a very expensive thing to replace because it was so specialized.
Yeah. So it might have been a metallic sputter coating or something on that. Okay. Thank you.
I worked with some Digital Equipment Corporation, and they had fixed platter discs like that, and they were shiny. And as you noted, James, if you touched that disc, you were in deep trouble. No fingerprints. You had to be very careful with them. They had something, and the heads did not move, but they had something like maybe 12 or 16 heads spread across it.
Right. When you look at the MPEX technology, again, it's analog video. You look at digital recording here for computer, you do have some way to do some error recovery. Analog video, you did not. So again, that service had to be pretty much flawless. Otherwise, you had perturbations in your picture.
The HS-100 disc was a very shiny silver looking disc, and the heads, there was a stepper mechanism for 2 sets of heads on the top and 2 sets of heads on the bottom of each disc, if I remember correctly. I've only seen one in operation. I have never played with one. It used a VR1200 type signal system with that half line thing to make it into 2 fields two different fields so you can make a frame out of it.
It did some interesting things out in Redwood City. Unfortunately, long gone.
When I saw that picture of the shiny disc, what came to my mind was I worked with the old ones that look like videotape, the brownish color. And I was thinking that the reason for shiny might have been as a way to regulate the air currents that would be over it as it's spinning, less friction or whatever. And I know that the head assemblies I used to work with had a little wing shape to them, so that air pressure would make that head float. Just it had a little tilt in the arm that would go out.
And I'm not sure if there even is an HS-100 still around anywhere. I know if somebody had one, it would be the Museum of Broadcast Technology in Rhode Island. They have just about every video recording machine Ampex made, but they do not have an HS-100, or didn't when I was there. They did not have the ACR-25 video cassette machine that Ampex had made, but they had just about everything else, and most of it was operational. But I did not see an HS-100. I don't know where they all went.
I don't think they have one. I was there last summer and they didn't then anyway.
It'd be interesting to find out, like, I guess maybe put up a search on eBay and see what happens. Who knows?
Maybe one in somebody's garage, who knows,
Yeah, there might be one at the Stanford Ampex Museum collection.
Deep Six back there, that collection basically went to the Four Winds when the museum there in Redwood City was closed. I knew the curator, and he was very upset. And some of the stuff I did find, a couple of the machines were eventually sold on eBay, went out of the country.
Yeah, well, I've seen the collection at Stanford in storage, and it's a big room of videotape machines. Ray Dolby, my boss, paid for moving most of that equipment back to Stanford from Illinois, I think it was.
I don't know where, but Pete Hammer, maybe knew him.
Oh yeah,
yeah, he's still around, and he's the one that was very distressed. He was a curator, and when they decided to close the museum, and I know some of this stuff did appear on eBay. I found a Magnacord wire recorder with it was a Capstan, only wire recorder I've ever seen with Capstan, and it had broadcast specs and mounted, balanced input output. Somebody had it here locally in the DC area, and he was selling it to somebody out of country. I know I wanted to go out and take pictures of it, and it was already boxed up at the time, ready to go overseas.
Yeah, Pete was pretty upset over that loss of a lot of that equipment. I have an original inventory of what was originally in the museum from Pete, and in fact, Pete is the guy who talked my boss Ray Dolby into paying for the shipment of what was left back to Stanford. But there's a lot of gear there. Maybe one of those HS machines is in that pile.
You might get on the Quad Video Group site and see if anybody knows where one is.
I remember in 1986 looking at purchasing a Sony 20-inch XBR television's receiver, which had a separate box for the receiver from the CRT. And this was in a high-tech shop in Santa Cruz, California. And I remember the tech shop explaining to me they were trying to demo it in its best light during the local news broadcast. And they explained to me that, with NTSC, the live network feed signal would be 330 lines that you'd see during either news or like a live sporting event. And you mentioned, I think, this FSE camera was 320 lines. Can you explain a little bit more about the difference and why they might have had that discrepancy between NTSC?
I can tell you about that. You're comparing two different numbers. The moon camera had 330 scanning lines. NTSC system receiver without a comb filter has a bandwidth in the luminance of about 3 megahertz, which equates to 330 lines of horizontal resolution, but it's not discrete scanning lines. It's just the number of black and white details that it can resolve. Did that help?
Yes, thank you.
Well, I'm going to sign off here, gentlemen. Thank you very much, James.
Well,
Wonderful
quite welcome. Glad to
presentation.
do it. I, again, don't claim to be an expert, but I did have some inside information here. Meeting these people that I mentioned, they was quite educational. I just wish now, looking back, all of them have passed from the scene. I wish now I've got so many more questions I would love to have asked while they were still here. Unfortunately, can't do that. Can't go into
James,
rewind and start over.
James, I hope you, it's such a wonderful presentation. I hope you publish it somewhere.
Well, I did publish again 3 articles, summer of 2009 in TV Technology. Again, the first about the moon camera, then about the color, which I just went through, and then about the lost recordings, the slow scan recordings there on the multi-track instrumentation tape. So I did publish 3 articles on this. But yeah, there's a lot. Of course, I couldn't publish the magazine. Anytime you're dealing with a print publication like that, you're basically space limited. So there are a lot of things I couldn't put in the article. A good bit of what I shared tonight was not in the article. I didn't go down, I say, into the noise and or into the weeds and pull things up like I did in this presentation.
Is
So
that TV Technology Magazine on worldradiohistory.com? Do you know?
I do not know that. I do not know that. But again, most everything that I published, again, I started, hard to believe, 20 years ago and was with the magazine almost a decade full time and still writing for them. Virtually everything I published from day one is online there on the TV Technology website. You can do a search for my name, do a search for the topic, say Apollo 11, and you'll find these articles. Now, some of them, the pictures have been stripped out of the text, but most of them, they're still intact with the pictures.
And don't forget that tonight's presentation will be on YouTube.
That's true. I mean, that's the good thing about these things is this is on YouTube. And as long as YouTube's around now, we have no idea how long that's going to be. But you know, at least it's out there, and this information, which I think a lot of us have never heard all of this. I mean, this was really revealing to me anyway. And I don't claim to be an expert, but on the other hand, I've been around this stuff for a long time, and I learned a lot tonight. So thank you, James, for that.
Well,
Yeah, this
quite
was
welcome.
superb, James. And over on YouTube, someone made a comment, wow, this was the best presentation like this I've ever seen. So you have some enthusiastic viewers. Yeah. Hey,
I try hard.
I'm going to just suggest, I forgot that Steve usually asks anybody who is new attending here if they might want to introduce themselves. If there is anybody who hasn't been here before or hasn't introduced themselves before, we'd like to hear from you. Any new participants out there?
Well, that would be me.
Is that Philo's building behind you?
That is 202 Gurney Street in San Francisco. Yes. Who recognized it?
Bill Ray. I live in San Francisco and I've been over there.
Okay. Well, I'm that guy.
I knew I saw your name before.
Thank you. And I'm here tonight because I've been spending quite a bit of time on the web in the last couple of months because I am trying to draw attention to the centennial of Farnsworth's first successful electronic television transmission That was on September 7th, 1927. The centennial is coming on September 7th, 2027. And to my sensibilities, that was at the very least an important milestone, if not the pivotal occasion in the evolution of television. Now, I very much appreciate what I've been hearing here and the sensibilities that I see for the prehistory of television, which I would consider anything prior to that moment. But James, in particular, I would love to be able to enter a dialogue with you because you seem to, I mean, I guess all of you have a very good sense of what this history is. And I'm now writing my own history. I'm going to do the top 100 moments in the first 100 years of television, dating back to that date in 1927. And I've already been posting that on a website, on numerous Facebook pages. I was looking to post something on your page, but I don't think that's allowed. Somehow Facebook it doesn't let me post there. But that's who I am. That's why I'm here. And if anybody wants to join me in this crusade, I'm here to solicit that aid, particularly in correcting where I'm wrong about the history. So that's me. Anybody else?
Well, I would offer something here, looking at some of these historical moments. Again, you have an individual I've written a lot about and lectured about. I'm going to be doing a presentation. It's a hybrid virtual in-person presentation here in December for a local radio collectors historical group.
About
this is Reginald Fessenden.
Oh, Fessenden, sure.
Fessenden's name is not particularly associated with television. He did claim to have invented something called a ferroscope, which was his name for television. Again, not really known in the television circles. A lot of people were working, especially with mechanical television, in the mid-1920s on. But I did pull his patents, and I was going to suggest you go to Google Patents and look for these patents. I did a presentation at ETF a number of years ago. Maybe some of you remember it, but it was a revelation to me looking at these patents. Now, again, patents I've seen and I've talked with people. I do not hold any patents, but I was told you put only enough information into the patent to get it through the patent office. You do not put enough information in the patent so somebody can reverse engineer your invention. Okay, looking at these Fessenden patents, it's just incredible. Mid-1920s, ahead of John Logie Baird. He makes claims. He actually gives information on the materials he used to make some sort of a video gating device, the wire, everything else. So I can't help but believe he did not build, he built, I can't help but believe he did build an operating television system. But you look at the patent, he makes a claim for infrared vision, for color television, and the one which really blew me away, video encryption. This is the 1920s. So yeah, pull those Fessenden patents.
Your statement about what goes into a patent is curious to me, because when I began all this research, and I've been on this case for most of my adult life, and I just had my 75th birthday. But when patents were first explained to me, it was a very different explanation. What I have understood the case to be, that the point to a patent is that it should instruct anybody versed in the art how to build the device disclosed therein. Because that's the whole point to having a patent, is that you're making the claim, the initial claim on the ownership of that technology. And so you should be safe from somebody being able to build that device from those instructions.
Yeah, you make the claims, but you do not go into chapter and verse, fine detail how you achieve this. And reading this Fessenden patent, he even goes down and talks about the tiny wire used to make a light valve. So I've got to believe he actually made an operational system. But just the fact he was describing infrared vision, he's describing color, he's describing video encryption in this patent. It's just mind-boggling in light of what anybody else was doing.
There is no record of his having built anything.
Pardon?
I say, but there is no actual record of his having built these things.
No, he was very secretive. Actually, he had his fingers burned a bit there when the company he was working for to develop a complete communication system, NESCO, National Electric Signaling Company, decided to terminate his employment and then liquidate the company. It went into receivership. And he worked for years with lawyers trying to recover his intellectual property, which first, I believe, went to Westinghouse, then later RCA. And there was an out-of-court settlement in the late 20s, undisclosed amount, but apparently was a fairly substantial amount for this intellectual property that RCA at that time did have in the form of his patents.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at that period of time, he was second only to Edison in generating patents. I'm talking about sheer number, sheer volume of patents. So this television patent is sort of lost down there in the noise. But I did find it, and it's just a revelation to read this in light of, you know, the fact this was before John Logie Baird, before some of the others. So again, I'm just saying you might want to look at the Fessenden patents when you're building this timeline.
So I actually was writing about Fessenden recently, and I've absorbed so much here. Sometimes it's a little hard for me to remember the details I've already written. But my recollection of Fessenden is that he made some of the most notable contributions in early microphone technology. Am I wrong about that? Or putting sound on radio waves?
It's the continuous wave. It's the continuous
let's
wave.
Put this in perspective. I think the true inventor of the microphone is the guy who invented the phonograph record, not the disc, Emil Berliner.
I'm familiar with Berliner, and I got stories about Berliner too, but that's a whole other case.
Yeah, so I think looking back there, but Fessenden did describe the microphone used in this public demonstration, world's first public demonstration of radio telephony on December 21st, not Christmas Eve, December 21st, 1906. What he did, he modulated this high frequency signal, this RF signal coming off this alternator, by breaking the line, going to the antenna, putting a carbon microphone in series, a very improved telephone transmitter, so to speak, the carbon mic used in the telephone system. However, this thing had iridium elements because the RF current is generating a lot of heat. The microphone is dissipating some 24 watts of this RF signal as heat. The microphone was water cooled and also had iridium elements. So it was a specialized microphone, but it was a very poor way of generating amplitude modulation. By Fessenden's own admission, his depth of modulation was no more than 5 to 10%.
Okay, so that is what I have written, is that Fessenden shifted to continuous waves, and that gave him the ability to put actual audio on radio waves. But I do have the year as 1906, but what I picked up was that it was Christmas Eve. And you're saying it was December 21st.
Yeah, I published a number of articles about this. I've even been invited to lecture at the Smithsonian about this. There is no contemporary evidence of this Christmas Eve broadcast ever having taken place. And I did do a good bit of detective work. On the other hand, this December 21st public demonstration of radio telephony is very well documented, extremely well documented. There were even 2 Associated Press reporters invited down to witnesses. But there's absolutely nothing to make this December 24th Christmas Eve story stick. And I even think I found an explanation of why Fessenden later claimed this some 25 years after the fact. He never mentioned it at all until he was prodded by one of his former bosses at Westinghouse in either late 1931, early 1932, to answer the question, I think maybe to settle a water cooler bet of sorts. Did you, sir, do the world's first transmission of music and speech on Christmas Eve 1906? And Fessenden answered in the affirmative. But there are a lot of things wrong even with the answer. There are a number of facts that just don't line up. Fessenden states in his letter and what really happened, what really went on in 1906. And believe me, I've spent a lot of time researching this.
May I add one thing to this? Because I've thought about the same thing, James, about the anecdotal story of 1906 and what prompted Fessenden to actually say it was about that time. Because there was, of course, a person who was the physicist who was a self-promoter, a very good self-promoter, Lee DeForest, who in 1910 purportedly used a synchronous spark transmitter and modulated it to do a live broadcast from the Metropolitan Opera. And it seemed to me that there's a degree of perhaps competition here, in as much as that if 1910 he did that, Fessenden would have, and I have no doubt that it was probably before 1910. In fact, have you heard of other dates such as 1908, 1909 that he may have done that from Brant Rock?
Well, let me put this in perspective too. Again, I was provided, I did not know this existed, but after I published my first piece on the supposed 100th anniversary of this, again, not in December, but my article came out in Radio World in October of that year, I believe, 2006. I got a letter from the radio historian Alan Douglas. Maybe you've heard that name. I'd met Alan at some AWA conferences. I didn't know him well, but out of the blue, he sends me a copy of a document put together by a Bell telephone engineer who was invited to witness this December 21st demo. That was Greenleaf Whittier Pickard. He went on the next year to invent the crystal detector. Okay, this is where I come up with these numbers. The alternator was operating at 50 kilohertz. That was established, 50 kilocycles then. This was sort of a sweet spot. Fessenden had opted for 100 kilohertz, 100 kilocycles, but there was a trade-off between power output and frequency in the alternator that General Electric, Ernst Alexanderson, had provided at that point in time. So they were operating the alternator at 50 kilohertz. Again, I talked about the modulation technology that is described in this report that Greenleaf Whittier Pickard did for the Bell system. Also, the depth of modulation that is in there, and the fact that the alternator was developing a max of 36 watts. This was determined with a measurement with a hot wire ammeter. This is mentioned in Greenleaf Whittier Pickard's report. Again, out of the 36 watts, 24 were dissipated as heat by this microphone in the modulation technique that Fessenden used. Okay, this leaves 12 watts to feed the antenna. And this sounds pretty impressive. But here's what a lot of people don't realize. This antenna that Fessenden had, again, nobody put up radio towers in. He had employed a company that specialized in building tall smokestacks to build a 3-foot diameter smokestack about 420 feet high. And it was set on an insulated base. Fessenden had designed insulators to break up the guy lines. So he developed the world's first, again, series-fed insulated base radio antenna. But be that as it may, 420 feet, it sounds pretty impressive. But he was operating with 50 kilohertz. And you do the numbers, the wavelength 50 kilohertz, you're talking something in miles. And to be an efficient transmitting antenna, you need at least a quarter wavelength. You do the numbers on this 420 feet versus 50 kilohertz and the wavelength from 50 kilohertz, that antenna is 1/47th of a wavelength. And you do the numbers, again, you look at the gain of that antenna, it has about a -12, -13 dB loss. So of the 12 watts that's actually going out in free space, being radiated as a signal, you have less than 2/10 of a watt. Looking at the other end of the equation, Fessenden claimed in this 1932 letter, on Christmas Eve, we had reports of reception from as far away as Norfolk.
On a move shot, you know.
Pardon?
If the camera operated on 23 watts, that's quite remarkable.
Well, the alternator, I said, put out 36 watts.
Usually they're very power hungry.
The microphone gobbled up 24 of that 36 watts. So you were left with 12. But because the antenna was particularly inefficient at that operating frequency, you actually only radiating less than 2/10 of a watt in free space.
Yeah.
Pardon? Okay, what I'm saying, Fessenden said in his letter in 1932, he claimed we had reports of reception from as far away as Norfolk. This was Christmas Eve. Now, Norfolk is over 300 miles away from Brant Rock. You look at what existed in terms of receiving technology at that time. There were 3 detectors. There was a Brantley coherer, which was strictly a digital recorder, it was, or excuse me, detector, it was either off, it was either on. It could not detect amplitude modulation. You look at the other technologies, the magnetic detector from Marconi, it did detect AM, demodulate AM, but it was particularly insensitive. It said it was a good detector if the two ships that were on were in hailing distance of each other. The other detector had been developed by Fessenden. It was the electrolytic detector, the liquid barretter detector, as he called it. Not particularly sensitive. The crystal was better, which had not been invented in 1906. So a receiver at that time, a radio receiver, was a demodulation device, i.e. this Fessenden electrolytic detector, a tuned circuit, capacitor and coil, a ground, an antenna, and a pair of headphones. The vacuum tube had not been invented. There's no gain. Again, Fessenden's signal was not a particularly loud signal. By his own admission, according to this report of Greenleaf Whittier Picard, he was achieving no more than 5 to 10% depth of modulation. So you tell me how somebody, again, this was a surface wave, a ground wave. It did not bounce off the ionosphere. How he claimed that somebody 350 miles heard the signal. And he goes beyond that in his 1932 letter. He said, we did the same thing a week later, New Year's Eve. We got reports of reception from as far away as the West Indies, 1,400 miles away. It just doesn't line up from an engineering perspective. Now, giving Fessenden credit here. By 19, again, Ernst Alexanderson worked with Fessenden, developed more and more powerful alternators, high frequency alternators. By 1909, Fessenden had an alternator which was substantially more powerful than this Christmas Eve, supposed Christmas Eve broadcast alternator, the 36-watt machine. We're talking a kilowatt or two. Again, Ernst Alexanderson went on to develop these things all the way up to 200,000 watts. So Fessenden had a substantially more powerful machine in 1909. Also, I found documentation. Fessenden's company, Nesco, entered into an agreement with the Navy to conduct a series of long-distance radio communication tests. Basically, they were using his spark transmitter. I think he had a 35, 40 kilowatt spark transmitter at Brant Rock. But Fessenden also had this much more powerful high-frequency alternator. So I think on Christmas Eve, and you follow there was a flotilla of ships that left Boston, sailed down the East Coast, went down to the West Indies, then went over to the Canary Islands and back. And the objective here was to see how much, what sort of time we could establish communications back and forth between the ships and home base at Brant Rock. And I just can't not help believe Fessenden decided on Christmas Eve 1909 to do a little something different, fired up this much higher powered alternator and played some music. Again, maybe read the gospel according to Luke about Christmas Eve's origins, goodwill to men, and all sorts of that. But by that time, you had two other people that were broadcasting on a fairly regular basis. As you mentioned, you had Lita Forrest in New York, and you had Doc Harron out in California. They were broadcasting using arc transmitters. So broadcasting was not a particularly novel thing in 1909. I'm giving Fessenden an out here. So I think he was confusing the dates. Christmas Eve 1909 with this demonstration he did on December 21st, 1906, and I'm going to shut up.
All right,
Thanks
guys,
for your insight. I appreciate it.
Yeah. There's a lot to digest here. I've taken the liberty of posting some links to the work that I'm doing in the chat here. And James, in particular, if you just drop me a line to that email address, I'd love to engage you in a dialogue about this if you have the time or the inclination. I'm working in a bit of a vacuum here. I'm working with the material that I can dredge up, but whatever feedback I can get on the work that I'm doing, I would be grateful for.
Well, I would refer you. I published, I know, at least 3 articles in Radio World.
Yeah, I've pulled up a page here. I Googled you. I have found some things, and I will avail myself to that stuff over the next couple of days. but just so I have some way of contacting you
Sure, I'll be
you're-
glad to
if you'll
correspond with you.
engage. I've posted my email address in the hopes that you'll send me an email so that I have yours.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that. Probably not tonight. It's getting late. I got to get up. I got an early morning ham net, 75-meter ham net I do Sunday morning. So
All right.
I need to pull the plug on this pretty soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. But yeah, I'm glad somebody else is interested in Fessenden. Again, I brought him up suggesting you look at Fessenden's video patents, television patents. It's just mind-boggling what he's describing back then.
I will look that up.
Okay, I'm going to say good night unless somebody else wants to take a parting shot at me. But it's been fun, and I hope to do another one of these. And then again, I don't claim to be an expert. I try to get things right. If I didn't get something right, please let me know about it and I'll correct it.
Hey, thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Done here. Good night.
Thanks for subbing there, Dave.
All right. See you all next month or whenever.
Good night, folks.
Good night.